In this video, we're going to talk about displaying a collection, which is an array or a list, with a loop. And so far we've done this with a for loop, but now we're going to teach you about the for each loop and explain the differences between the two. To start out, we're going to create a list. In this one, this list is going to contain decimal elements. It's going to be called bills to pay. We're going to set it equal to a new list of decimals, and then add in 3 starting values, as you can see on the screen right here. Okay. Now, let's review the for loop before we go into the new for each loop. So the for loop is great because it repeats a certain number of times. So a for loop can cycle through any data collection. So that's going to be an array or a list right now. So the key thing about a for loop is that you are going to use the array elements directly. Now this is going to be different for the new for each loop, which we're going to talk about in a few minutes. So when the for loop is running in kind of a loop, we are actually going to be using the actual element, which means we can change the elements in an array or a list inside of a for loop. Now, a for loop is also going to be great for displaying or altering that data. So let's take a look at this. Now, here's the for loop that we've used when we were talking about an array. So we're going to start with a for. Then we are going to have our initializing variable, int I equal to 0. It's very important that it starts with 0 for this case, because notice the first index of our list is also 0. So that's always going to be the case. Now our test is going to be next. So that is going to be I is less than bills to pay dot count. So this ensures that this for loop will loop as long as there's elements inside of our list. Then we have our I++, which is our increment of change, because our index numbers go up by 1. So it starts with 0, then the middle one is 1, and then our last one up there is 2. Now, inside of our loop, we use our console.writeLine just to kind of write out to the console, but we have our bills to pay square brackets with an I. Now, remember what happens here. Each time this for loop goes, this I value is going to be changing. The first time it runs, the I value is going to be 0. And let me pull that up here, right? Now, what that means is bills to pay square brackets of 0 is this first box, okay? So it is exactly that element. So inside of this for loop, when we're console.writelining this, we are actually taking the element inside of this list and writing it out to the console. Now, the next time this loops, the I++ makes the I value 1, and then our console.writeLine, bills to pay, square brackets of 1, is going to be the actual second box in our list. So we're going to be dealing with that value. So it's going to write line out $423.99. We come to the closing curly brackets. We go up to that I++, and that I value now becomes 2. Is 2 less than bills to pay dot count? Well, the count for this list is going to be 1, 2, 3. So is 2 less than 3? Absolutely. So that curly brackets is going to run. What is bills to pay square brackets of 2? Well, that is going to be that last element inside of our list. So we're going to be outputting 19.25. So that's going to be the key thing for the for loop, is that we're actually using the element itself, which means that we could also change the values of our elements inside of this for loop as well. So we could put bills to pay square brackets of 2 equals a new value, and it would permanently change. Now, let's talk about the new for each loop. Now, the for each loop is going to be great because we can also cycle through data collections, which right now is arrays and lists, but the difference here is that it's going to make a temporary value that's going to hold the actual value of each different element inside of the array or inside of the list. Now, because it has this temporary variable, we're not going to be able to change anything inside of that array or list, which means the for each loop is great really for only displaying the data inside of these data collection types, either a list or an array. So let's take a look at the for each loop. Now we have to start it with for each, all lowercase. Then we have our decimal bill. Now, decimal is going to be the data type that is going to be inside of our list. Now, remember, we created this list to be a list of decimal values. So if this contains decimals, then you have to put the data type of decimal. Then we have a variable name right here. And normally this is going to be the singular of whatever you're putting multiple of inside of your list. For example, if this is a list of bills to pay, then one individual element would be called a bill. If this was a list of teachers, then one would be a teacher. If it's a list of pets, then a singular would be pet. A list of book titles, just one book title, right? Because we're dealing with one at a time. Then we have in, which is going to be a keyword, so that's going to always be there. And then we're looking for a decimal bill in what? And the what is going to be the name of the data collection. Now, data collection is either array name or a list name. Now, what happens inside of this for each loop is a little bit unusual. So there is no counting variable. We don't have to initialize something to 0 or anything like that. Now, what this does is for each decimal inside of the list, it will run one time. And each time, it's going to create this temporary variable called bill. Now, you can think of this as just an empty box, right? That's going to be only available inside of your for each loop. Now, what's going to happen is the first time this for each loop will run, this value inside of bills to pay square brackets of 0 and just the value, so the number 135.50 will come over to our bills box, and the bills variable will take on this actual value. So notice we're not dealing with bills to pay square brackets of 0. We're only dealing with this new temporary variable called bill. Now, right now, it contains the same value, so we can actually utilize it just like we would bills to pay. So in this case, when we do a console.writeLine bill, then we would output 135.50. But the key difference here is we're not dealing with those actual elements, just with the values inside of it. Now, when this loop goes to the next one, what happens? Well, it's going to come up and it's going to take the value of 423.99. But notice it's still going to be the variable bill. Okay? We're just changing the value inside of it. And when it loops a third time, it's going to take on that 19.25. But notice it's still the variable bill, and we're not dealing with the actual elements. So inside of our for each loop, how do we use the bill? Well, we use bill like any other variable, right? So that means we can just use a console.writeLine with the variable name, bill. That's pretty much about it. It's really great for displaying information, but you can't set a value to this. And the reason is I put bill equals a new value, it gets lost. Because every time this loops, the variable of bill gets reset and takes on a new value coming from the array or from the list. Now, let's take a look at our code, and we can actually try this for ourselves. I just went ahead and started a new C# project, and I just called this one ForEach versus a for loop. And first off, we're going to have to create a list. Now, of course, we do have to add that using system.collections.generic, but we'll do it the easy way. So list, open, closing carets, and inside of here, let's put a decimal. Now notice it's going to have that red squiggle, so when we hover over it, it says, hey, that doesn't exist in the current context. Click this little quick fix button, and just click the using system.collections.generic, or we could hand type this in up here at the top as well. Both is going to be good. When you do, this will turn green and this will turn blue, indicating that it now knows what a list is. So what I'm going to do is create the list from our example. So I'm going to say bills to pay, and I'm going to set it equal to a new list of decimals, if I can click it right, list of decimals, open, closing parentheses, and then that semicolon. Now what we're going to do is we're going to add some starting values. So the way we add values to a list is bills to pay, and a period, then an add, open, closing parentheses, and a semicolon. Inside of here, 135.50, and remember this is decimals, so we got to make sure we add that M inside of there. Remember, it stands for money. Let's go ahead and make a couple more. Bills to pay, dot add, open, closing parentheses, a semicolon, and inside of here, 423.99, M, whoops. And then finally, the last one, bills to pay dot add, open closing, and a semicolon. And inside of here, 19.25 M. So now we have our starting list. Let's go ahead and try our for loop. So let's put a little note in here. For loop, and let's put what it's good for. Good for displaying and changing values in an array or a list. Okay, so let's go ahead and create it for open closing parentheses, and let's go open closing curly braces, split those apart. Remember, we have to initialize it, so int I equal to 0. We have to start at 0 because our index numbers of this list will start at 0. A semicolon. I is less than our bills to pay dot count. Remember, if we're dealing with a list, we have a dot count. If this was an array, this would be a dot length. Okay, a count for a list because we can add and remove items, so that count is always going to be changing. An array is immutable, which means we can't change the values or change the amount of elements, so that's going to be a length. Then we have a semicolon and an I++. Inside of here, we can actually utilize this, so let's do a console.writeLine, open closing and a semicolon, and inside of the parentheses, let's go ahead and put a double quotes just for a text string, and we're going to say the item, and I'm going to put curly braces with a 0, is curly braces with a 1, and then a period. Now remember, these are going to be text parameters, and we can fill them in after our double quote by putting a comma. And the item, I'm just going to put maybe item number over here, so we can kind of put 0, 1, 2, and so on and so on. So inside of there, let's put the I value, then a comma, and I want this to be the actual element, so I'm going to put bills to pay, square brackets of I. Okay, so let's go ahead and run this and see what we got so far. Maybe. There we go. Okay, so item number 0 is 135.5, which is correct. Item 1, 423.99, great. And 2 is 19.25, which is wonderful. So remember, these are the index numbers, 0, 1, 2. This is 0, 1, 2. Okay, now here's the key thing about this. If I wanted to, I could actually change or alter these values inside of the for loop. So let's do this. I can change the values of the list elements. Now, you're going to want to do this later when we start talking about string methods, and when we start talking about the trim method or anything else that's going to be altering the actual elements. You could actually put a prompt inside of here, so you could say, hey, give me a new value, and you can actually add stuff to the list, you can change things, you can do a lot of stuff inside of a for loop. So this one is going to be very good anytime you have to display or change, and especially change, anything inside of these elements. So for this example, I'm going to do something kind of wackadoodle, which is I'm just going to make everything equal to $20. So I'm going to say bills to pay, square brackets of I, equals 20.00 M, and then a semicolon. Now what this is going to do is it's going to permanently change every single item. Because when I is 0, it's going to say bills to pay 0 is now 20 bucks. So that's going to be this value, right? The next one is going to be 20 bucks, and the next one's going to be $20. Because whatever this I value is, it's going to change along the way. The key thing I want to show you here is that you can actually change these values. I don't know why you would set them all to 20, but this is just an example, right? And when we try to run this, you'll see that it will allow us to run. You won't actually see the 20s come up, by the way, because we display them first and then change them. So let me show you this. If I wanted to show you guys that they were changed, I could actually just copy this whole entire console.writeLine and put it below where we changed the values to. So this will show you both ways. So let's go ahead and try it. And there you go. So this write line is coming from this line right there, where we actually output the original value. Then I permanently change the value to 20, and then I output it again. And this goes for the element of 1s, for the index of 1s, and the index of 2s. Now, anything after this for loop, those would be permanently changed. For example, if I come outside of my for loop and just do a console.writeLine, open, closing, and a semicolon, inside of here, I'm going to say the second element in the array, or list, is open, closing, curly braces with a 0 in it. Outside of there, put a comma, and then I'm just going to put bills to pay, square brackets of 1. Now remember, it's a second element. We put an index of 1 because the first element has an index of 0. Now, I'm outside of my for loop, right? So notice now it will be 20 from then on. Okay? So that is the key difference between a for and a for each. Now for this example, I'm just going to go ahead and comment this out for a minute because I want the original values up here. Okay? And just by commenting them out, this is going to be duplicate, right? So that's going to be the same. So instead of having that, I'm just going to comment that out as well. Let's go ahead and run it one more time so we can show we're back to the original output of that. And then our second element in the list is 423.99 because I did not change it to 20 anymore. All right, so now that we have an understanding of the for loop, let's go ahead and try out the for each loop. Now, a for each loop is great for displaying elements in a list or an array. Okay, so we start this with for each, all lowercase, open, closing parentheses, open, closing curly braces, and split those apart. Now, inside of our parentheses, we have to set this up a little bit differently, right? And what we have to do is we have to start with the data type that we have inside of our list. So we have a list of decimals, so down here we have to put decimal. Now we need a temporary variable, and this can be named whatever you guys want. The key thing for professional coding is you always try to make this a singular of whatever you're making multiple of. So this is bills to pay. So 1 would be bill. Then we have the keyword of in. Now for each bill inside of what? Well, inside of the list name is bills to pay. So bills to pay. And that's it. Kind of a much simpler setup, right? So inside of here, we can actually just do a console.writeLine, open, closing, and a semicolon, and put a text string inside of here. The elements, or this element, in the list is open, closing, curly braces with a 0. Outside of those text strings, then we're going to have a comma, and just the temporary variable of bill. Let's go ahead and run this. And these are the new elements down here. So the element inside the list is 135.5, 423, and so on and so on. So it will run once for each element inside of this list. And this bill is taking on that value of the actual element. Now, because that bill is a temporary variable, so let's put that inside of here. So bill is a temporary variable. So we cannot change it. Now let's go ahead and try this and see what the error is. So bill equals 20.00M and a semicolon. First off, it's red. That's never a good idea. When we hover over it, we can see cannot assign to bill because it is a for each iteration variable. So that is programming speak for, hey, this is a temporary variable, and whatever you put inside of here will not stick around because this is a temporary, right? So you can't actually change anything in bills to pay. So this will not work. And I'm going to comment that out, and I'm going to actually put a little note up here saying this will not work. Okay, because I don't want you guys doing that. Now also, what happens if I try to access it later outside of my for each loop? So this is the start of my for each loop. This is the end of my for each loop. So outside of it, What happens if I try to use that console.writeLine, open, closing, semicolon, and just put the variable bill? First off, notice it's not in my quick menu list. That's never a good sign. And when I hover over it, it says it does not exist in the current context. Now, what this is, it means, hey, you can't use bill because it doesn't exist outside of these curly braces. That is the only place that bill exists. So that's going to be that key difference. Okay? So this also will not work. You can't access the temporary variable outside of the loop. Okay. So, we've ran through the for loop and the for each loop using a decimal list, but I did want to run you guys quickly through a string array too. Now remember, this could be a decimal array, it could be a list of strings, it could be a list of floats, it could be a list of custom variables that you're going to learn in the next class. It can be a lot of different stuff. All right. So for this example, I'm just going to make a string array. So string square brackets. What are we going to call this? I'm going to call this board games equals a new what? A new string array and a semicolon. Inside of here, I'm going to put 4. So I'm going to put 4 different spots. So this means my elements are going to be index of 0, 1, 2, and 3. Okay. Now, for this, I'm just going to go ahead and set the values inside of curly braces. So we're going to put curly braces after our string. And inside of here, we need to make sure that we have the correct amount, right? So we're saying, hey, we have 4 elements that I'm expecting. You better give me 4 elements. So I'm going to put in my first text string, and let's put ticket to ride. Outside of here, put a comma. Let's put another text string. We'll put this one as King of Tokyo. By the way, these are all great board games. If you guys get bored and you want to see them. Then we'll put a comma again. Let's see. Let's put Smash Up. Oops, a text string of Smash Up would be good. And finally, another comma, another set of double quotes. And inside of here, what's my other favorite game? Let's say Small World. And it's not just a ride at Disney World. All right, so all I did here was just create the 4 values inside of my board game array. Okay. All right. Outside of it, let's cycle through with a for loop first. So let's say for open closing parentheses, open closing curly braces, and split those apart. Inside of here, int I equal to 0. And we don't have to use I, by the way. We could use any variable name, but I is the most common by far. I is less than board games dot. Now think about this. Arrays have a length. Lists have a count. We're dealing with an array, so we have to make sure we're using this length property, not count. Okay. Then we have a semicolon, and we have I++. Inside of our for each loop, I'm just going to put a console write line, and I'm going to put open closing curly braces is one of my favorite board games. And I'm going to fill in that text parameter with the actual array element, board games, square brackets of I. All right, let's go ahead and take a peek. And here we go. The name of each of the different board games is one of my favorite board games, is one of my favorite board games, it's one of my favorite board games, and so on and so on. Okay, so that is the for loop. If I wanted to permanently change them, I could inside of there using the same way as above, just board games, square brackets of I equals a new value. So let's see the for each loop. For each loop, open closing parentheses, open closing curly braces, and split those apart. So now we have to figure this out. We need a temporary variable, but the correct data type. So what is this data type? Well, we're going to be sorting through the array board games. So one board game is going to be a string element, because this is a string array holding multiple strings, right? So down here, we're going to put the data type of string. I'm going to put game, because that's a singular of board games, in board games. Inside of our curly braces, I'm just going to do a console write line. And I'm going to say, I like the board game. And let's do normal concatenation this time. Outside of that, I'm just going to put a plus sign and game. And this is just to switch it up, showing that you don't always have to do this text parameter. Okay? Let's go ahead and run it. Anything that starts down here, now it's cycling through our string array elements and outputting those to the console too. All right, so this has been examples of sorting through a list and an array using both a for and a for each loops and the difference between those two different loops.